Welcome to 3 Count Commentaries. I am your host, MagMongoSlade. Today, we are going to discuss an article. It is Pride Month, and therefore, it does not go without very cringy, pride-based material from this channel. But something went under the radar from last year that I don't believe I ever talked about, so I'm going to discuss it. So there is a person by the name of Abraham Josephine Reisman. In March of 2023, this person wrote an article saying, quote, "Wrestling turned me cis, then it turned me trans." And this article was posted in Polygon. Now, because I didn't discuss this before, I'm going to discuss it now. Now, who is this Abraham Josephine Reisman? Well, this is a person who wrote a book called Ringmaster, Vince McMahon and the Unmasking of America. It's supposedly a biography of Vince McMahon that spends a great deal of time talking about Donald Trump. So every article I've seen on that book involves Vince McMahon and Donald Trump. Not so much about Vince McMahon himself. But this article is about Abraham, herself, if that's how you choose to do this, and how pro wrestling affected her. Okay? So we're going to get into this, and it's going to be funny, and I'm going to try not to be too mean. I'm going to actually try to be understanding. I'm going to try to be mature about this subject. And we will see how far that gets. My bullies all loved pro wrestling. Oh my God. Right out of the first sentence. This first sentence. All right. It was spring 1999. We were 13-year-olds at a public school in the Chicago suburbs. And every day at recess, they would harass me. Though I long wiped my memory clean of any specific insults, the overall theme could be summed up as, "Look at this faggot." So you had a regular childhood. They called you a faggot. I got called a faggot too. It doesn't matter. It didn't affect me at all. Anyway, this is I am not going to be able to make it. I'm not going to throw in the towel. I'm not going to tap out. I'm going to try to be fair again. But the next sentence, I just read it in my head. I got to say it out of my mouth. I was a defective boy. I sang in the hallways, wore flared jeans, had platonic friendships with girls, and always leapt at the chance to play a woman in a class skit. They were real boys, burly, cackling, anti-intellectual, and always ready to identify a homo. It always goes back to high school, doesn't it? Middle school or whatever, right? Like, do these people ever grow out of this kind of stuff? Do you ever just grow up? Why does this stuff have when they say public schools are for socializing, it seems like more public school is for trauma. You have so many people running around holding on to traumas from grade school. This dude is running around. This her is running around with trauma from grade school. Oh, they used to bully me and they liked wrestling. Okay. That's weird. They were real boys, and it's all just stereotypes, But yeah, if you were jumping at a chance to play a girl in a skit, you kind of begged for it at that point, right? Maybe you could not do those things. I don't know. Anyway, he says, I loved mid-century musical theater and weird British comic books. They loved the World Wrestling Federation. We know who took whose lunch money in this situation, right? Oh, have mercy. My bullies liked wrestling. Oh wow. Okay, they are anti-intellectuals. We've been talking about that on the channel a lot lately, about an article in Sports Journal, which discussed a teacher survey about the effect of wrestling on their students. Now, it's a very interesting correlation here. This is a great case study, considering that article found that children who watched wrestling, specifically boys, were more rough and tumble, and they did worse in school. So you have this Abraham Josephine him her Reisman is basically saying, my experience in a Chicago public school is that I was bullied and picked on by boys who liked pro wrestling. And if you were the author of this article, Matthew J. Bernthal, you would say, hey, look, this actually fits my thesis. This actually supports my article that pro wrestling, even though correlation does not equal causation, there's a lot of teachers who said when they saw a student that watched pro wrestling, two things. One, they mimicked it. So they picked up bad affectations from wrestling, like middle fingers and crotch chopping and doing wrestling moves on each other and that kind of thing, which can be signs of bullying. If a guy's just walking around putting people in headlocks, especially if you're always the kid getting put in a headlock, it be considered bullying. But, also, those kids did worse in school in terms of grades. So if you were, Bernthal, you could say this Reisman person is actually making your argument for you. Even though it's not quite, again, it's just correlation. It does not mean causation. But let's continue with Reisman's article. Her writes, quote, while they tormented me each day, the faces and slogans of their favorite wrestlers leered at me from their t-shirts. Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, The Undertaker. There's a special little humiliation in being gay bashed by someone wearing a jersey that, in the words of WWF squad D-Generation, invites you to suck it. Interesting. Very interesting, especially considering all of these were found in Bernthal's research. Was, boys telling each other to suck it, doing the suck it motion, Stone Cold Steve Austin giving them the middle finger, etc. Again, this is doing a really good job of really bolstering the Bernthal research article. Reisman continues, I didn't exactly have a political objection to the WWF at that age. It was simply what the boys who hated me liked, and that was enough to repel me. Interesting. The bullies liked wrestling, so I'm not going to watch wrestling. I'm going to continue to make myself the oddball. Sometimes being a kid is like playing whack-a-mole, right? The one who stands out is the one who gets hit. You're dealing with children. And sometimes in the workplace, it could be the same thing. Sometimes in the educational field, it could be the same thing. And these are the unfortunate stories that we have, but everybody does it. I'm pretty sure somebody is refusing to wear a pride flag or involve themselves with some kind of pride festivities right now, and they're being tormented in a different way at the workplace, or they're being ostracized for not participating, for not having their pronouns and emails. Because this is the nature of human beings. Human beings want you to conform. They want you to be more like them, not less. The more you are like the people you're interacting with, the less that they bother you. It's kind of like being in a gang. If everybody's wearing blue, you should be wearing blue. If everybody's wearing red, you should be wearing red. It doesn't mean that it's right. It just means that this is what human beings do. And the gay people and the trans people do it too. They do it too. They have these collections of things that they're expecting of you. So back then, these boys had an expectation And at 13, you likely didn't know what you were doing. You were just playing around with your friends. They probably picked on him because he was so different, in the hopes that they could, you know, they wouldn't be able to intellectually say this, but in the hopes that he would ingratiate himself with them, in the hopes that they could, he could continue doing what he do, but he also gets involved in what they're doing. Because usually that's how it works. They're not trying to make you exactly uniform like American Psycho. What they're trying to do is to bring you into the group, to make you one of, a part of the group, but you don't want to be. And there's consequences for not wanting to be. Let's get back to this article. Reisman writes, quote, "Then something strange happened. My soul male friend, Jonathan, caught an episode of WWF's weekly flagship show, Raw is War, while channel surfing. He was blown away by what he saw and immediately demanded that I watch it with him. I trusted Jonathan. He wasn't a bully, so I gave it a shot. I fell in love. I must have already known that professional wrestling was fixed, more of a scripted art form than a legitimate sporting competition. I absolutely didn't care. I was entranced by how these men, defied everyone who stepped into their path. They were my demographic's visions of ideal masculinity, and suddenly, I wanted nothing more than to have their confidence." All right, so he's hero. He's finding heroes in the wrestling show. These guys are defying, their expectations, and, Attitude Era makes sense. 1999, they're breaking the structures of what traditional pro wrestling is. They're doing their own thing. Okay. And now he wants to do his own thing too. He wish he had the confidence to break apart and do these things. All right. It makes sense. He says, "I began watching WWF programs religiously. First with Jonathan, then with a small group of boys, most of whom I had never been close to prior to this. One kid's parents had a huge finished basement, and we'd gather there for the sacred viewing of pay-per-view events. At one such event, I was surprised to find one of my bullies in attendance. By this time, school officials and our parents had stepped in to serve as a kind of junior high no contact order. So I was prepared for the encounter to be awkward. But instead, we just did what we come to do. We watched wrestling and talked about wrestling. We were finally on the same side. We were the same thing. Just fans. Just boys." Wow. Without even reading, I didn't get this far into this article before I decided to do this video, right? But how right was I? The bully saw you doing something normal. You liked something that he liked. Now you're not a faggot anymore. Funny how that works when it comes to teen boys. I thought you were a lame, Reisman. You like wrestling? Who's your favorite? Not all of a sudden y'all got something to talk about. Now all of a sudden you might be friends. They want to play football, they want to play basketball, they want to wrestle, you want to be a theater student. Of course they're going to look at you like you're weird. You don't want to hang out with us? You want to hang out with the girls? I don't know about you, Reisman. I think you might be a fag, buddy. And then all of a sudden, oh, you watch wrestling. Okay, you might be a little cool. He's being socialized. And again, children do socialize each other. Because they create their own little cliques. You have the mean girls and the jocks and all that. They create their own little cliques. And if you, again, operate outside of those cliques, maybe things are not going to work out for you. And everybody who has ever been an outsider, quote unquote, a nerd, homosexual, or whatever, if you're different, too different from the rest of the group, you're bound to get that whack-a-mole treatment. And that's boy or girl. Regardless of age and regardless of, race. Let's get back into this article. Reisman writes, quote, "As the weeks and months wore on, this group became a tightly knit cohort. The first group of male friends I'd ever had. We watched the rampant homophobia, misogyny, racism, transphobia, and other assorted provocations, and we loved them. Oh, see, now, Reisman, see, we were on the same page, buddy, and now you start talking all this istophobe stuff. You know, you just can't watch the product and enjoy it. I mean, as a kid, he's enjoying it, but now he's a grown man, hopefully, and he's looking back on this stuff, and he's, you know, with his feminist critical eye, and all of a sudden it's istophobia, and it's like, maybe they were right. Maybe the bullies might have been right about you, Reisman. I'm not so sure what's going on, brother. He continues, quote, "We learned that this was what it meant to be a man, to be safe, to be superior, to be powerful. The bullies had taught me that I had to be a man to be worth anything. Wrestling taught me that being a man was worth everything." That's an interesting quote. I don't think I picked that up from wrestling. I was about 15 in 1999. I pretty much walked away from wrestling almost near the end of that year. I don't think I picked up masculinity from watching, you know, he was talking about he was 13. What took place when I was 13? Let's see, 1997. It would have been DX. Would have been, you know, the early days of Stone Cold Steve Austin. Would have been the early days of Brett, you know, Brett's turning heel. I don't think I picked up anything about masculinity from pro wrestling. I don't think I picked up anything. I just think I watched the show and liked it. I would have to ask my boy Big Certs, like, brother, he's a year older than me. He'd have been 14 or 15 at the time. Brother, did you learn about being a man from pro wrestling? Because I could have swore that we both had fathers, and he has older brothers who basically raised both of us. And we learned our masculinity from them. I could have swore that happened. Now, this guy, I'm not so sure about Reisman, okay? Not so sure about you, buddy. You know, but I guess being a man is worth everything. But it's about sacrifice. You know, Warren Farrell says, it says women are human beings, men are human doings, meaning that manhood is something that has to be earned. You know, when you look at traditionally male industries like being a police officer or being a firefighter or being in the military, that comes with a uniform. When you look at art, and this is how it stuck with me when he explained it this way. When you look at art, they very rarely drew men naked. Like you probably think of Michelangelo's David, who is a man who is naked. You know, I think it's an old statue. But when you usually think of art about men, he's wearing some kind of uniform, right? Or he seemingly has some kind of job. He has status, right? And you have to sacrifice in order to achieve said status. And to be anything in society, you have to work at it. But when you look at art that is about women, they're almost always naked, or they're wearing very little, because the power of the woman is something that she's born with. Because we always place femininity and fertility together. Like the woman can do something a man can't do, and that's reproduce. Men can't get pregnant. I think this guy probably thinks he can, but he can't. All right. So we look at women and say, you can feed another person with your body. You can give birth to another person with your body. Your status is inborn. They'll kill 3 men to save 1 woman. That's called male disposability. So men have to be men of action. You have to be a man that's worthy of a uniform. Whatever that uniform, it's your choice. That's the thing about being in a free society. You choose what kind of uniform you're going to wear. Do you want to be a garbage man or a plumber? Do you want to be a mixed martial artist that has a uniform attached to it? You want to be a pro wrestler that has a uniform attached to it? You want to be Spider-Man that has a uniform attached to it? But you have to be a man of action. You have to actually go out and earn respect, earn status. And that's something that you can learn from pro wrestling. If you want to be the world champion, you got to go out there and earn it. Even in a fixed sport. So, okay, let's see what else he's got for us. Reisman writes, quote, "My fandom waned after a few rabid years, but in early 2020, I began work on Ringmaster, a biography of WWF owner Vince McMahon. To report it, I plunged back into McMahon's product. The visions of masculinity I'd consumed with such desperation as a kid, including McMahon's turn as the villain protagonist, that's called an antagonist, that the crowd loved to hate and hated to love. This time, though, I was an adult, and the toxicity was hard to ignore. In the last 20 years, even as the WWF's popularity has plateaued, the attitudes and devices it championed have spread into every aspect of our civic life. McMahon's close friend Donald Trump rehashed McMahon's hero-villain act on the main national stage, while employing McMahon's wife in his cabinet, supported by a generation of voters who had accepted McMahon's version of masculinity. This time, I no longer wanted to be accepted by this nation of bullies. Rather, I wanted to defect, to secede." So let's break this down a little bit. He goes back and watches the WWF product, after no doubt going to college and getting brainwashed. And all of a sudden, because now he's weaponized with critical theory, he goes back and he finds problematic behavior in everything. And this time he says, I can't just laugh and roll with it. I have to be outraged. And this has something to do with Vince McMahon's masculinity and Donald Trump. Now, here's the thing. The hero-villain narrative that he's talking about is, something that Donald Trump brought to the national stage. It's like, bro, I remember, and everybody remembers, the hero-villain narrative is a part of every single campaign for public office I remember being inundated with commercials going all the way back to the 80s. And I've seen some where you see a guy, he's soft on crime and he's letting gangbangers and criminals back on the street. That's your bad guy, right? Today, you see it all the time. These guys, they hate grandma. They're going to kill grandma, or you hate science. You're anti-intellectual. What are you doing except creating your own hero-villain narrative? This ain't got nothing to do with Donald Trump. I remember everybody hated George Bush, and everybody loved Bill Clinton. And for a long time, everybody loved Obama, until they didn't. The hero-villain narrative is integral to storytelling, and every politician is trying to tell you a story. The story of how they're the hero who is going to better your life. They're the one who is going to change your life. They're the one who's going to take this country to their utopia. And they're all wrong. They're all liars. So when you go back and you see something that you enjoyed as a kid, and now you've weaponized yourself with critical theory, and you're going to go back and you're going to say, I don't want to be part of this anymore. I need to secede from this version of masculinity. I want to flee from it. Well, now we're in the Andrea Dworkin level of femininity, or feminism, I'm sorry. Andrea Dworkin, for those of you who have not listened to my lectures on this subject before, there's a book called Heterophobia by Daphne Patai. I read from that book all the time. That book talks about Andrea Dworkin and what she preferred men to be, which is essentially eunuchs. They need to cut off their penises, literally or figuratively, and push away from being men and be more like women. So Andrea Dworkin had like a male partner. I don't remember what his name was. It was Michael something or other. And that guy had also decided that maleness and manliness was toxic. and wanted nothing to do with it. So he says, I'm not going to be a man. I'm not a man anymore. I'm going to give up being a man. Whatever that means. So you see this. This is where these people, when you say like you're anti-intellectual, this is what they think intellectual is. Right? They think that you can just be like, I'm not a man anymore. I surrender my manhood. And everybody else is supposed to be like, okay. Like nobody thinks like that. That's stupid. that's dumb. But let's go back to this thing here. He says, but I also saw something I hadn't seen before. Wrestling is built around masculinity, but in its own way, it is also transgressive, even queer. Men in wrestling wear bright colors. They intimately touch other men in public. When they're allied, they speak of each other in the warm terms of life partners. When they're at odds, they issue ambiguously sexual threats, such as, I want your ass. Okay. Now, this is somebody who is, this is what's called queering, right? He's going back and trying to find homoerotic and homosexual things in subjects that are not homosexual, all right? But he's also, in a very weird way, trying to create this box, right? They always do this because they're trying to turn you into a homophobe. Men they're touching each other in public. It's like, so what? Nobody ever said it was gay to touch another man. They're not, jacking each other off or anything. Like nobody's fingering each other's buttholes. If you're in a fight, like boys wrestle, that's what they do. They have no problem touching each other. Where did you get the idea that it's sexual from? That's your fetish talking. That's your politics and your fetish talking. You're trying to queer this subject. They wear bright colors. So does Big Bird. So does Sesame Street. What are you talking about? They wear bright colors. So what? In your mind, men don't wear bright colors? I guess spandex and makeup are going to be next. Okay? Which is all things that community that he wants to be a part of adopted from pro wrestling. But whatever. I want your ass. That's very weird. He says, quote, most importantly, they show pain. The essential, irreducible element of a wrestling match is the ability to show suffering. The very thing drummed out of every boy by high school, if not earlier. It's the heart of the art form. No matter how skilled a wrestler is technically, it doesn't count at all unless they can make the audience believe they're being hurt. Every wrestler has to spend a significant amount of every match showing nothing but raw, visceral agony. They have to show their secret face, the most vulnerable one of all. Okay? Wrestling is an art form, one that turned out to have also planted seeds in my mind about how fun it is to dress up, show tenderness, be vulnerable, and do the things you're not supposed to do. Well, what are you talking about? Things you're not supposed to do. You can be vulnerable. Every coach has seen a boy cry. Every coach. Anybody who has ever seen a boy fall off his bike has seen somebody cry. Being vulnerable is not an issue. Being a crybaby is an issue. And people keep getting this whole thing mixed up. Your boys aren't supposed to cry. It's like, you're not supposed to use your tears frivolously or manipulatively, which is what girls do. Girls will fake cry and to manipulate you. Boys are not allowed to do that. Boys who are trying to emotionally manipulate their parents by crying and all that, nah, we don't do that. And a smart parent will actually get that out of their girls too. But sometimes, especially dads, they tend to, oh, my baby crying, oh. But with their sons, they're like, hey, cut that out. That's not going to work. You're a grown man. What the hell are you crying for? But you've seen grown men cry playing football and losing. Gotta lose a game his eyes start getting red. We've seen that. We've all seen that. But there are limits to everything. And you seem to be one of the guys, Mr. Reisman, that wants to go beyond the limits. And we're not willing to change society to benefit certain people. So he continues writing, quote, "A few days before I turned in the final draft of my book, I told the world via Twitter that I'm not a man. I'm choosing to live as a trans woman now. I go by she now. This is the conclusion I might have come to all those years ago if my bullies hadn't terrorized me out of it. Wrestling showed me how to be a man, but it also gave me a second message, one that had finally reached me. Wrestling taught me to be cis at 13, and then it taught me to be trans at 36. That is oddly bizarre. A almost 40-year-old man is like, I'm a girl now. Out of nowhere. I might have come to this conclusion at 13 years old if they hadn't beat my ass. Maybe the response is somebody need to beat your ass now. But I'm not going to go that far. Look, do what you want. All right? I'm firmly in the camp of people needing to do whatever it is they need to do. But at 13, I'm pretty sure you weren't old enough to make the decision that you were going to take pills or, hormones and all that kind of stuff, because that stuff's irreversible. I know that they've lied to you and said that it's not. Oh, puberty blockers. Oh, you can just, like puberty is a thing, like a light switch. You can just turn it on and turn it off. Like biological issues with your body, you can just turn it on, turn it off. No, you can't actually. Your body wants to do one thing, you trying to stop it. I mean, that doesn't turn out well. I mean, that's like saying, you could just stop your own breathing and it's just fine. It's like, no, you can't. You will die. Your body wants to function in a way that works. And sometimes people's bodies don't function correctly. But if you have a normal body, your body wants to function normally. They don't want you getting involved doing all kind of crazy stuff. All right? And for some people, they don't even want you shaving it because you'll get bumps and everything. People shave and they get all the bumps in because you're using a razor and all that stuff. There's a consequence to getting involved with the functions of your own body. Trying to change what it does and why it's doing it. He's writing a bunch of stuff about Vince McMahon. I don't know what's going on with that. I'm going to skip all the stuff about Vince. And he says, I'm not sure what those individuals who bullied me are up to today. We were all kids driven by ideas about manhood that made us miserable. I think you're speaking for yourself. I don't think you can speak for them. Don't speak for them. He says, I am now unlearning them. I hope their journeys have taken them far as well. To be a queer and trans wrestling fan is to invert and expand the industry we all love to hate. Not everyone comes along on the ride. One of wrestling's virtues is how much it can bring desperate people together, which means there are still plenty of bullies who watch wrestling. I have chosen to opt out of that demographic. I've seceded. I've shown the world my secret face, and I haven't looked back. Well, good for you, Cupcake. This individual is a navel gazer. This is called navel gazing. You're going to school and you're studying how to study yourself, how to center yourself into everything. This was my experiences, which is fine, but my experience is different. You get bullied for different reasons. The reasons, pretty much everybody has been susceptible to bullies in some way, because there's always going to be somebody in a circle that's a little bit better than you at something. You're always going to be at the bottom of whatever kind of social ladder and have to work your way up. That's just the nature of existing in the world. And you should have got a therapist rather than a dress. The deep irony of this Abraham Reisman article is what I was saying earlier about, men are human doings. And, men have to be people of action and they wear uniforms because isn't that what Reisman's doing? By going out here pretending to be a girl, pretending to be a woman, you're trying to use femininity to climb a social ladder. No different than a private in a U.S. military puts on his uniform, hoping that one day he'll be a general and actually get tons of respect that he will have hopefully earned through hard work and strategy. You want to instead adopt femininity and the status of woman by, I guess, doing the work of unlearning masculinity, quote unquote, wearing feminine clothing, assuming feminine positions in sex, and hoping that one day you can achieve the status of woman, a status that you cannot work for because you do not have the tools, meaning you do not have a uterus. Your breasts do not produce milk. You do not have eggs. Men will not die for you. You will never reproduce for them. You will never give them what they desire. You will never achieve the status of woman. That is the desperate, weird irony about this whole thing. Is that in trying not to be a man, you're the most pathetic man of all. A man who chooses to climb an awkward social ladder, destined to fail, never to achieve what he actually wants to achieve. So you're going to do all the work of unlearning masculinity and changing your body and destroying yourself and still fall way short of what a woman actually is. Thank you guys for your time. Like, share, subscribe. I'll talk to you guys later. Peace.
MagMongoSlade. Best house I ever drew, daddy.